it's going to be easy to say, well, Bank of America has the deeper war chest. Yes, they do. But it's
Hmm.
still an expense. You've got to look at the ROI from their perspective. Is that worth Bank of America's time, energy, and capital to organically branch in, expand a network, and do all that, knowing they've got to go up against that community bank where the relationships are deep, the municipal deposits are likely being held, the small businesses are getting their loans from. Understanding that you do have a moat in your local area, you are the big dog. You are, in your world, you are the big fish in the little pond.
Hello. Today we've got Byron Earnhardt with us. Over more than 15 years, he went from the teller line in Tunica, Mississippi, up through the branch management, and now runs the programming at the Barret School of Banking and hosts the Main Street Banking podcast. He's also a fourth generation musician who plays in Delta Heart with his dad and brothers, and the wall of guitars behind him on a call is, by all accounts, a permanent fixture.
Right.
Thank you so much, Byron, for being here with us. And please, handing over to you, take us into your world for a minute. How do you describe what you actually do?
Oh, that's it's only a 30-minute podcast. No, I'm the. Thanks for having me, man. Look, really excited about this. I'm the programming director at the Barret School of Banking. What that is here in the U.S. There's not really a lot of academic study of the banking industry, and so about 100 something years ago, uh, one of the bankers on Wall Street got some friends together, started a graduate level school of banking. This completely different entity. It's outside of academia, and that was the Stonier Banking School. Around the country, then several other of these graduate level banking schools began to pop up in order to better serve the banking industry. About 20 years ago, 25 years ago, a banker passed away here in the Memphis area, and I live in just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. Passed away and left an endowment to a regional school that allows us to subsidize the cost of a graduate level education in banking for smaller banks. So, long story short, the Barrett School, we really view ourselves as the community banking graduate school here in the U.S. And what that allows us to do is that we can have the level of education that you could get at a Stonier or one of the other schools, but for half the cost because our endowment subsidizes that. So the community banks, which I know is a little bit different animal than what is modeled elsewhere in the world, but we're talking anywhere from 50 million in assets all the way up to right around 20, 25 billion in assets, which there's about 4,000 of those banks here in the U.S. We try to get in every one of them, but we are really targeted on that band of the banking industry here in the U.S. And so my job is to help stay abreast of what's going on in the industry as best I can. Stay
Hmm.
abreast of what's going on in the industry, thinking about what bankers need, talking to their management about gaps that they're seeing in the industry in terms of knowledge, and then creating programs. Really finding subject matter experts. They don't want they're not pay, they don't want to hear me talk. They want to hear the subject matter experts talk and presenting that in a format to the community banking industry. We've been fortunate enough out of the 50 states to have somewhere in the low 40s number of states bankers come from us, and we've at our graduate school or any of the other programming we do. From Maine to California and Washington, North Dakota, Florida, Georgia, at all points in between. So
Mhm.
um, it keeps me busy, but I'm basically trying to teach banking to bankers and staying up to speed with what's going on, and presenting that material to the banks out there.
Interesting. So tell me a little bit more. How did you come up with the idea that there is a need for practical education for these bankers? Why? And let me rephrase it in a way as so if a CEO of a community bank is sending someone to you versus just training them on the job, or maybe a third route of hiring someone with a degree in a some were banking, finance, and accounting. How do you frame what Barret gives them that the day job or a degree can't?
Well, the degree, at least in the U.S., there's not many institutions or colleges that are putting out a banking degree. You can get into finance, and being a finance, a finance, having my bachelor's in finance, you kind of tend to go towards more corporate finance or real estate slash investment slash portfolio management, et cetera. I mean, let's be honest, that's where more money is going to be made. More
Yeah.
folks are going into those jobs than are going
Yeah.
into banking. So you run into, there's not many degrees granted through academia that are going to be in banking. And if they are, you've got, and this is sort of a uniquely American problem in that there's so many banks, and a lot of these are in very rural areas. And so, if you found somebody, I don't know, that had a degree in banking, then are you going to pay them enough to move to a small rural town? And so
Hmm.
there's a talent gap there. Um, and that's what I why these graduate schools of banking, how they arose in the U.S. And as opposed to on the job training, I mean, as most of, I'm sure your listeners know, they just don't have the time. They just don't have the time to get people trained, because banking is so, once you really drill down into it, and on the commercial banking side,
Hmm.
it is so nuanced. It is so, and it's a different animal than a traditional for-profit business. Our accounting is a little bit different. Our financial statements are a little bit differently. So, you've got to spend, if you hired somebody with an accounting degree, you've then got to kind of retrain them on how the financial statements are organized just before they even know what they're doing in their job. The language changes.
Hmm.
So it's easier to offload, so to speak, or outsource that to a graduate school like ours, and the others, but offload that to, or outsource that to a graduate school. For one thing, because of our scope, we are kind of more plugged into what's going on in the industry versus what's going on in one particular town. Nothing, no knock against that, but the reality of it is, if you're a CEO in a largely, a
Hmm.
mid-sized town, ag-based, a lot of SBA, Small Business Administration lending, things like that, it's really hard for that individual to keep up with all the AI trends, all the compliance changes, all the discussions going on around emotional intelligence and culture and its impact on corporate. You got a day job, you know. Um, so it's just easier to put that over onto a school. And we found that as the workforce begins to crave more career training and job training, that becomes a benefit
Hmm.
rather than a new employee getting onboarded from the trainer while the paperwork piles up. Getting to go to a banking school, the bank investing in you to pay the tuition, to go to school, to work with Bear, that becomes a benefit that has sort of an intangible value or perk for the employers to offer their employees, and kind of say, hey, we think enough of John or whoever, we think enough of you, John or Susie. We're going to spend money and send you to a graduate school to really beef up your knowledge on the industry.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially, there's a benefit not just to the banks, but also to the employees in their career trajectory. Well, that's what I'm getting at as well. You, your, the school's aim is to create all-rounders who can take up on leadership roles in the future, and the the community banks, they can benefit from it as well by having that gap of talent being mitigated as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you spoke to sort of like the all around. That's kind of a guiding philosophy or North Star principle that we call it the holistic banker.
Hmm.
And by that, what we mean is banking is, I mean, it is a numbers driven, left brain, understanding the convexity and the duration of your bond portfolio and all this kind. I mean, you've got to get into the deep number crunching with banking, but at the same time, whether it is the student, the college student, or the biggest employer in town, all of that is driven by relationships. All of that's driven by
Absolutely.
understanding people, having emotional intelligence about yourself, about your people, having empathy with all that. And so it can get very relational, very right brained in nature. We teach that holistic, we believe in the holistic banker. And to say it nicely, you got to be good at both sides of your brain in order to be a successful banking. We don't want to waste the banks, our banks that work with us, or the time of the students by just teaching them nothing that they're going to use later in their life. We look, the bank's putting money into you, they're wanting you to grow. So we look at every student and every program from our graduate school all on to the other ones as the future leaders of the community banking industry, however that may shape out in their own lives. So we teach them uh, but we put as much time in emotional intelligence and culture as we do crunching numbers on the balance sheet. And so we really take that whole person approach in teaching them and understanding really that holistic side of banking.
Amazing. So what's the common friction that you see when people from different departments, they have to speak each other's language for the first time? So if you have a relationship manager going to operations or operations going into credit risk, and I think your first year deliberately puts lenders in operation classes and makes operations learn about lending and the evaluating credit risk.
Yeah,
So
that's the trick.
yeah.
That's the and if I had a man, if I had the perfect answer to that, I'd be laid out on the beach somewhere with a drink in my hand right now. No, I mean, how we attack. I think there's several facets
Hmm.
to that problem. One is culture. I think we get in having been in banking, everything gets siloed. The operations tends to stay with the operations side, and they may or may not know what the lenders are doing. Compliance may or may not really understand what I'm painting broadly here, but may or may not understand what the role of the lender is, and management may or may not be communicating uh, the strategic direction for the bank, and so everybody's kind of out there on their own like lone rangers. Um, and so I think that's more of a cultural thing. And so you run into, and as a lender, I'll use my own example. You run into a lender going out there trying to find deals, putting deals, building relationships, doing that, and then compliance putting a break on it because they didn't communicate. I don't know, some new flood policy or some new thing like that. Now the lender has to go back to the borrower or the potential borrower and say, well, I need more information. Well, I need to, rather than doing it right on the front end and presenting that united front. And you can apply that to different scenarios. And that's sort of the worst case. I think one of the big friction points too is technology. The tech that can be used to support those types of initiatives to break down those silos. It's there. It's been there for a long time. A friend of mine who runs the innovation for the Independent Community Bankers Association, Wayne Miller, says banks are always in a rush to be third, and so we're conservative by nature, and so new tech tends to we tend to be a little skeptical of, as I'm
Yeah,
sure you know, and the people
absolutely.
listening.
Absolutely.
We're
That's having fintechs now.
Yeah, we're not really what you call early adopters
Yeah.
to new tech. So there's some of that, and honestly, that speaks to culture as well. You don't have to be you don't have to be running on Windows 95 to call yourself, or Windows XP to call yourself risk averse. You can do. There are ways that you can uh, take properly put into place new technology, including AI. But you don't have to be so crazy about it. You don't have to go overboard. I don't know that banks in general, at least community banks, have really found that middle ground. I'm seeing some growth, but I think those friction points are cultural and technological, and I would say even educational too. And that's self-serving, I guess. But uh, you were mentioning the you were mentioning the operations, understanding the lending. That's what we try to do in a lot of our at the graduate school.
Hmm.
Our non-lenders, they take a lending class, but at the same time, the non they're it's on that non-lending track. Um, we teach them lending differently than we teach commercial lenders. The commercial lenders will do a deeper dive into spreading financial statements and all that kind of stuff. Whereas the ops person or the marketing manager will never have to spread a financial statement. So we spend more time on teaching them what the lending role is. So at some point when they're on executive lending loan committee, even as a marketing person or on the board committee or whatever, they understand they're speaking that same language. I like the way you phrase that about speaking the same language. It's 100% comparable to two people try to communicate with English and Spanish or French and
Hmm.
Spanish. It's an extremely comparable friction point there, and so I tend to approach it as teaching a language myself. But I think those are your three friction points. I think it's educational, systematic, and tech, and cultural.
Interesting. Okay. Now, I read when I was researching about Barret School of Banking, I realized that it's not just the cultural or the academic side of things, but you also take it up a notch. And I think it's a very passionate step. But tell me about Banky Sim, if I'm pronouncing it correct.
But yeah,
I, I thought of it as a kind of a flight simulator for running a bank.
ooh, I hadn't thought about that. I like that. Yeah, as part of the graduate school, I can't think of one that doesn't, but all the graduate schools, one of the highlights is in the last year, they'll do a bank simulation.
Hmm.
And the simulation, up until now, has been very, I'll say, archaic. And
Hmm.
they'll make decisions. They turn the decision sheet back into the proctor. The proctor will enter everything, the system will crunch the numbers, and then they find out the results overnight. Well, I'm not the world's greatest programmer, but there are better ways to do things than that. I know enough about it to know that there's better ways to do it.
Yeah.
We've been looking for a simulation that we could start owning for as an asset of the school. And we ran into a guy by the name of Dave Seiden up in Connecticut, and he had built a simulation in the cloud via Smartsheet that's real time, and the students can we use the analogy pulling levers. They can check and see well, if I move loan prices this percent, what does that do in terms of my net interest margin or anything like that.
Hmm.
So they can see that in real time. They get the experience of they get to ask the questions. They get to play with the numbers themselves in a simulated banking situation. And we found that one change can change up to 41 different variables in the bank's financial statements. So understanding that, I mean, it's one thing for you to say, well, all right, if I move my loan rates up 50 basis points, I ought to see a comparable change in in interest income. Yeah, but there's a lot of different things that filter down through that. So it what we've done is we partnered with Dave and we've created what we call the Bank Corporation, BANQUE Corp,
Hmm.
and we offer this sim not only through our graduate school, but as a training exercise for banks. And I know this may sound kind of weird, but we'll go into a bank and offer a 1 day, 3 year sim training class for middle management and things like that. We're working with some of the state associations to do young leadership, young banking leaders to do this, and we'll run them through the sim. They get in teams. We roll the dice to say, well, interest rates are going to go up or down, however many basis points. Um, it's kind of fun to do a rolling dice to do interest rate movements. Um, but these bankers are having a ton of fun. We always get that this was more fun than I thought it was going to be because we built it to where
Yeah.
it is engaging. We put a little competition around it. Bankers like to compete, have a little fun with it, um, allow a little smack talk going on, little poking at each other, that kind of thing.
They're
And
allowed to make mistakes, right?
yeah,
It's a safe environment as well.
well, and I tell one of the when I knew we had something, we were up in Maine, working with a bank, and they were doing this, and one of the bankers on one of the teams was 100%. He was a guy that was just mortgage lending, and the first time he was in there, he was basically he's one of these guys you can lend your way out of any problem. Interest rates are going down. We'll lend it, make it up on volume, do this. We had a guy who basically was that bank's mortgage department recommend to his team by the third year. He understood how the mechanics moved and what levers pulled. Recommend that they start selling off some of the mortgages. We knew he had it because he understood where his department fits into that big overall picture. He understood it a whole lot better now. And he said, he's like, we need to sell resis. I can't believe that just came out of my mouth. And it was a really cool aha moment that this simulation, if you do it right and it's not so archaic, that it just and we have a lot of other things built into it. Do you upgrade your core? Do you put more marketing dollars in this? We took it from just being a balance sheet exercise and we put it in the cloud. We put some more stuff around it that's more real life banking decisions. uh, People are having fun with it. We're having a lot of fun running them.
No, and look, I mean, I think from like I said, I think it shows how passionate like you are in terms of drafting and uh, designing this program as well. But what's the most consistent mistake you see teams make under that pressure within that environment?
uh, um, the most consistent I would see is at first blush, it is overreacting to to external market factors. You'll see teams almost always either pay too much for deposits or not pay enough or not charge enough on their loans, just depending on what the market is doing. They overreact or really, I guess, underreact too. Um, they're not really putting as much time into it's easy with banking. It's easy to just be a rush to the top or a rush to the bottom. Either on deposit, I need deposits, so I'm going to go pay more than everybody else in town. Well, or if you need loans, well, I'm just going to undercut the price, undercut everybody in town. Well, I mean, it's an easy go-to when you're thinking about your pricing decisions. Well, if you don't have, this is what I love about our sim. If you really take the time to understand all the mechanics of your balance sheet and your income statement, that's not necessarily the best move you can make. And so understanding that and thinking through those pricing decisions in light of the entire bank, that's really the biggest. I know that's a broad statement, but that's really the biggest mistake I see is you know, people not thinking through how moving this lever impacts everything else down up. How it trickles down to ROE. We grade it based on ROE/stock price. So how does that trickle down to ROE, your NIM? The bank in the simulation, the bank is under some regulatory guidance, and so you know you've got to hit your capital and liquidity numbers. This isn't just a race to get the most deposits. You've got to clean the bank up. The balance sheet's a mess, and so do you take that approach, or do you just go slaughter everybody in town on rates? You get into a rate war until and ignore capital. Well, that becomes the trade-off right there. And I consistently see people just going to town trying to trying to just win deals when that may or may not be the best move.
Yeah, I mean, there's wider consequences there in
Oh
terms
yeah.
of, it's like you said, and yes, that's the mistakes that you allow them to make to learn more about what could happen,
Hmm.
with these high stakes decisions. So really insightful. Well, I'm gonna pull the camera a little bit back now, and in the unfair game, you've argued that community banks can't beat Wall Street at Wall Street's own game. Tell me a little bit about that. Where do you think the real advantage actually sits for them if it's not scale or tech spend?
I think I probably need to go back and edit that or redo that blog, or at least make another edition on that blog post. It is. I got that idea from. I don't know if I got that idea from the movie Moneyball with
Yeah.
Brad Pitt, and when because it's a similar concept. And to summarize or to kind of put it in context, Brad Pitt is the general manager of the Oakland Athletics, Oakland A's baseball team, and they're an underfunded team. Their payroll is a lot less than the Yankees and all this kind of stuff, and yet they still have to compete. And he says, I love this. I love the quote. He was saying, there's the good teams, there's the mid-market teams, then there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. And I love that.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of ways, and I love community banks. I don't want to disparage us, but in a lot of ways, you can look at the banking in America in very similar context. You've got the J.P. Morgans, you've got the Bank of America. Then at some level, you've got a big gap between the community banks. You've got the regional, super regional. You've got a big gap in there. And yet at the same time, those community banks have a choice. They can either continue to remain independent or they can sell to whoever, or they can just well, they can't really shut the door. They can just, be happy and complacent with where they are. Well, okay. Part of the unfair game analogy is you've got to, in my opinion, community banks have to shift that focus. What you have to answer that question: do we want to remain independent, or do we just want to rest on our laurels and be kind of what we are and let everybody die out and just sell off whatever? If you want to remain independent, you've got to understand that there are some advantages to the community bank, in that in a lot of these areas community banks do the lion's share of small business loans. They do the lion's share of agricultural loans. So a lot of the agricultural products that are grown here in the U.S. or live here in the U.S. are done through a community bank. A lot of the small businesses are done through the community bank. And if you look at it from if you look at it from Chase's perspective or Bank of America's perspective, in order for them to grow into some of these more rural or smaller markets, that's an expensive proposition. Because if you're looking at a smaller, a smaller, let's say a small metro MSA
Mhm.
kind of thing, and that Bank of America, for example, may or may not be in, or may not have a strong presence within that MSA. Okay, metropolitan statistical area is what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Within that MSA, that community bank may be the dominant player versus Bank of
Yeah.
America. Now, it's going to be easy to say, well, Bank of America has the deeper war chest. Yes, they do. But it's still an expense. You've got to look at the ROI from their perspective. Is that worth Bank of America's time, energy, and capital to organically branch in, expand a network, and do all that, knowing they've got to go up against that community bank where the relationships are deep, the municipal deposits are likely being held, the small businesses are getting their loans from, understanding that you do have a moat, that in your local area, you are the big dog. You are, in your world, you are the big fish in the little pond. But where I think we start, where I would like to kind of change this philosophy. I'm glad you're talking about it because I hadn't thought about this in a while. With some of the fintechs and with some of the uses of artificial intelligence that we're seeing, the and y'all and your listeners may not agree with me on this. This is kind of a bold statement. The playing field is getting leveled. There are some fintechs that are using artificial intelligence and other powerful tools that, if banks are educating themselves, they can level the playing field. Now, Bank of America and JP Morgan can develop them in-house and all that. Again, goes back to the unfair game. But the playing field is becoming more level than people have started to realize. And I can kind of see it from the fintech's point of view. If I'm a fintech developer and I want to do a startup, do I go market to JP Morgan or do I go market to the 4,000 community banks that really need my service and can't develop it on their own? So it kind of uses the laws of supply and demand to allow for that leveling of the playing field. So there's always the unfair game. JP Morgan Chase is always going to be bigger than the average community bank in America. That's going to happen. It's an unfair game. How you view that and what you do within that context, like Brad Pitt was doing with the Oakland A's during that time in Moneyball, how you play the game, how you look at it has to shift. And now you can start being more competitive versus, well, there's really nothing else I can do. I guess I'll just sit here till I retire. You can't do that if you want to remain
Mhm.
independent. So I
Yeah,
think that's where that's come.
absolutely. Okay, that makes sense. And would you name any factors like, that would make them, the community banks within their area, within their pond, the big fish? Like, and I could think on top of my head, relationship building is absolutely number one, which probably Bank of America or Chase wouldn't really care too much about training on that one. The same goes for tech as well. Like you said, that gap is closing down. And if community banks really take that step, you know, not necessarily early adopters, but at least start being receptive to technological changes, that could also put them, right in competition with these branches.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's changing. I think we're starting to see that. We do a lot of work with innovation and some and a fintech accelerator. We do a lot of work in presenting really good, well vetted fintechs and presenting them to bankers. And I've seen a shift from being from bankers being dismissive and, oh Lord, here comes more AI, to really asking good informed questions.
Hmm.
I'm seeing that shift. And these fintechs are staying in business. So some community bank, they're getting implemented. The checks are changing hands, right? And it's shifting. And going back to that unfair game, knowing how to deploy that to protect your markets from the big bad banks. Um, that's how the community banking industry is going to survive. Now, I don't know, I don't know if I'm not a good enough economist to know if there needs to be more consolidation. I would love to see, all the banks remain as independent as they can. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Again, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be on the beach somewhere.
Okay. Um, you've also somewhere you've called poor onboarding, poor employee onboarding, a silent tax. And
Yeah,
whereas banks spend a lot of money winning customers, why do you think keeping their own people gets so much less attention?
because it seems to be that a lot of times, particularly in community banks, sometimes the need to fill an FTE is really great. Okay, like as an example, this is a simplified example. If you're in a branch and there's a customer service rep position open, a lot of times the workload has piled up on the other people while they're getting the new person trained, and that new person They've got to go through, I call it a couple of weeks of training, and that just compounds the issue of the overflow and things like that. So there's this sense of trying to rush the hiring and the onboarding process in order to get, excuse my language, a butt in a seat. Okay, in order to put somebody in there to get the job done and move on to the next problem. And I get that. I've been in management. I understand that completely. Where you fall short, where this becomes a silent tax, is that you're putting people in a position that they're not, unless they grew up in banking or have some other experience in banking. You're putting them in a position that they're not properly equipped to handle. It becomes, they don't understand banking. They don't understand how the FDIC works. And so they're not able to talk about that. They're not able to understand, why we can't always give an increase on our CD loan, our CDs, or things like that. We need to they're not necessarily understand that. So you've kind of put the new hire at a disadvantage in an industry that really and truly they don't know that much about. And so you kind of create it's really more of an opportunity cost in order to have that person up to speed and comfortable in the industry. Banking is notorious for acronyms and having FDIC, ABA, KYC, all the stuff, all the things. So you're putting them in. Going back to our language conversation, you're putting them into a job that's facing customers where they're ill-equipped to understand what's going on, and they can't speak the language.
Hmm.
And again, I'm not passing judgment. I've been there. I've had to do it. But that's where onboarding, where working with someone like Barret and onboard, we can shorten that learning curve and work with banks in shortening that learning curve to get your people better equipped, faster, to deploy them more efficiently and more profitably.
Hmm.
And we talk about language. One of the ones I do is called the language of banking. And the language of banking, it takes understanding how banks' financial statements are organized, and a couple of key ratios. And I teach it like a foreign language. This is the vocabulary words. This is how we build sentences. This is how you converse with a bank. How to talk banker. And so, understanding that loans are an asset. That's a vocabulary word. Understanding how some of the ratios work. That's putting sentences together. And then part of that, and I do it live, we take a real bank's call report, and I've sanitized it so there's nobody knows who it is. Um, they build a SWOT analysis and give recommendations based on that. So they're talking bankers. So we've gone for people who don't know what a debit is. By the end of that class, they're talking and they're giving good uh, consultant level recommendations and SWOT analysis for this bank because they're able to speak the language. That's sort of to our earlier conversation, but that's what I mean by that. Just hiring them in there, passing the drug test, making sure the credit check's good, teaching them how to run a tele window or how to use the computer and the core system. All important, but there's a huge chunk of onboarding bankers that you're leaving them at risk. You're leaving them kind of unequipped. And that's where I'm coming from with that.
Hmm. Thank you so much for that. I think that's a very fresh perspective that you've mentioned. But I want to talk about the regulatory side, the compliance as well. Um, how much of that burden is, coming on to smaller banks, community banks, and what's your view on that? Does Washington think that they know how banking works, or is it quite different from, how it actually runs in a branch in the midst of?
Oh, oh. Let's see how much of my foot I can put in my mouth on this. No, you know, a lot of it does fall on the community bank side. One of the one of the things I think Washington fails to understand, and they're getting better at it through lobbying efforts from the American Banking Association and the Independent Community Bank. More from ICBA, I will say, from the Independent Community Banking Association. Um, Banking is not a behemoth. Okay, banking. J.P. Morgan Chase does not do business the same way. While they are banks and while they are commercial banks, they are not the same animal. And so, for instance, capital regulation, capital numbers, stuff like
Mhm.
Basel and stuff like that, don't really need to apply to J.P. Morgan Chase the same way that it applies to a community bank, a $2 billion community bank here in Memphis. That's not one's systematically important. One's a CFI. One's truthfully is not. And so they don't need to have the same regulation. And I think the conversation is changing around some of that. We're seeing some limits on uh, like some of the like residential lending. The bigger banks have to do more reporting versus some of the others because of the regulatory burden. And I think that's good.
Mm.
Um, but as a banker, there's always too much regulation. So there's still more than we need to do. Um, I think any kind of conversation about regulation, there's always it always comes back to the pendulum. Kind of depends on who's in office and who's in Congress and who's filling the committees as to where that pendulum swings. Sometimes it goes overboard. And I'll be honest, in complete fairness, sometimes it probably goes back the other way, that they probably cut too much regulation because it
Yeah.
probably does uh, allow for some avarice to happen that nobody wants. I mean, nothing makes bankers more mad than other bankers or other lenders doing mortgage loans, for instance, that are junk.
Yeah.
It puts a black eye on the entire industry. Nobody gets more mad about it than those of us that were doing the right thing, both morally and financially, than to get painted with the same brush as the people that were just immoral jerks, I'll say.
Interesting. Okay. Nice one. Um, yeah, I'm gonna ask you about so far your experience working with banks in your network. When it comes to AI, what's the most common way you actually see them using AI today? Not the hype version, but the real one.
Yeah. What I'm seeing mostly is um, probably a couple of things, and I wish I had a way to quantify it a little bit better. But the areas I'm seeing the most is with fraud detection. I'm seeing that a good bit, and I'm seeing really good use cases of the AI picking up and simplifying some of the fraud, especially with like the elder abuse, the scammers and stuff like that. I'm seeing the AI pick that up better, and bankers deploying that better. And on a personal level, I'm glad, because elder abuse and things like that is just one of the things that just fire me up mad. Um, I'm starting to see, so there, excuse me, I'm starting to see more in, um, I'll say broadly, understanding their data, what they've got, what they don't have, what the banks have, what they don't have. I'm starting to see better uses and that for really, really, I'll call it focused, targeted micro marketing campaigns. Really, really specific stuff. That's the kind of thing we've had the ability to do by just kind of manipulating tables and stuff like that. But I'm finding, first of all, the AI is doing it better, and I'm finding some banks are beginning to really embrace that. Um, let's see, where else am I seeing? I'm starting to see too, um, for lack of a better term, knowledge management
Yeah.
with AI, and that is sort of the AI, the product is both customer and employee and inward facing. So the knowledge that the bank has, how to open an account, how to do a wire, how to do all that, lives within the it lives within the knowledge base of the bank, customers are able to access it, but at the same time having really good, better than we used to have. I think there's still room for improvement uh, on the front end for customers to use. That's not just the generic chat bot, but getting better at its responses, getting better at identifying the customer. And so seeing that from both angles, I'm starting to see some banks think about artificial intelligence down that line as well, which I'm glad to see because that's a broader use of our. I'm all for the fraud and definitely a big use of it, but having to me that eliminates a lot of the anxieties that employees have about AI and customers have around AI, and that kind of solves two problems at once if the model is good and if the responses are good and the knowledge is good, and
Yeah.
that goes a long way in that too.
Yeah. Okay. And do you feel community banks in this case, we spoke a little bit about how they've not been so receptive to technological change. So, but compared to the dot-com boom, do you see a lot more adoption happening now, or is there still a lot of room for that to be taken over?
Oh, I think AI is I think AI is growing and the capabilities are growing at such an exponential rate that I think there's always going to be room for improvement.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so I think for lack of a better term, I think the supply of AI is always going to be growing, and so therefore the demand will always be kind of rushing to catch up. So I think there's always room for improvement. However, I am starting to see, and I've been doing a lot of talking around or teaching and around this idea is approaching AI, approaching it like we would approach anxiety and mental health, and so kind of addressing it, knowing that we've got, when you have anxiety, like I do, you've got, you have it, but you have to still do things. You've got to still go forward and do this. And so punching through that, how do you do that? Take baby steps, understand, get in there and try, and start asking those what if questions. Well, if I can do X, if I can build this on Claude, just for my own fun, if I can do this on Claude, I wonder if I could do something over here for the back. I'm seeing that more. That's kind of been where a lot of my efforts in talking and discussion has been down those ways. But I'm beginning to see more adoption. The people that I talk to, I'm hearing less and less of the "we'll never go AI."
Hmm.
I'm hearing less of that, more towards the we're beginning to adopt, taking those baby steps. The problem that I guess your question brings out is there going to be room for improvement? Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, next week they're going to be doing things that AI, whatever, however you want to define that, is going to look different than it even looks today. So
Yeah.
there's always going to be that need for adoption, which is why I approach it more psychological of, getting your mind right. Therefore, whatever change happens, you're kind of always you're in the mood, or you're in the mindset to address and tackle whatever that change looks like.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Byron. I know
Oh yeah.
we're keeping track of the time, but
Oh
last
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
On your vision, you build a real digital presence for banking education, and just like to know, where do you want that to be in the next year or two, or even in the next 5 years?
Woo. Um, for banks did digital education. I am where I'm kind of taking things without giving my hand away too much. Barret, the thing about Barret, there's three of us. There's our executive director, Chris Kelly, myself as programming director, and our marketing director, Ashley Gordon. And there's only three of us. And so traveling, I mean, right now, if we didn't pick up another state, we serve bankers across 40 plus states. There's no way, and I've got all of us have a family. There's no way I can go do live training in all these banks.
Hmm.
So we do a lot on Zoom. We do a lot of virtual learning, and where we're really starting to see some improvement, really putting a lot of effort, is making a virtual learning experience. I won't say as good as alive, but pretty dead gum close. Okay, because we think about our facilitators; they've got to be good on Zoom, the same way as they are in a classroom. But one of the things I'm working on too is I'm building out a learning management system, learning management platform. And one of the things that we're going to be implementing in that is using AI to create role play opportunities for bankers. As an example, one of the we have in our commercial lending academy, we teach bankers how to how to put together a term sheet and how to do pricing and setting prices and things like that. Well, putting it into creating modules where you've got to negotiate that with an AI business person in your community, so it's not just some AI talking head. If I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm learning about commercial banking, it's going to be a restaurant owner in Memphis, and feeding that context into a 5-minute discussion with an artificial intelligence that puts into practice there. So you know, we're going to be virtual because I just can't be everywhere all the time,
Of
but
course.
thinking through how to leverage AI to create those really intense, valuable teaching opportunities, and reshaping that a little bit versus the here's a recording on Zoom. So that's kind of where we're heading. And honestly, I think that's where we're heading. And I really don't see how, for banking education, I don't see how you're not. I don't see how anybody could not be heading there.
Of course. Okay. Let's leave it there. I
All
really,
right.
really appreciate you doing this, and I think it's been amazing. It's been an amazing conversation, and I for one could keep on going on. And I think if I had more time, I would have touched more on those guitars as well in the background.
Believe me. As much as passionate as I am about banking and what I do, I could go longer on the guitars.
Yeah.
I tell my boss that look, I've been in banking most of my just about all my career. I really view myself as a guitar player who just happens to be in banking. One pays the bills, one doesn't. So no,
No, that's complete.
I'd love to finish up this conversation anytime, Charles. Thank you, man. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for, and like I said, I mean, thank you for very transparent, genuine conversation and how you showed us how you actually think about this industry as a whole. I think there's a lot more than a dollar. There's a lot of social atomic thinking behind it as well, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. And yeah, anytime, just give me a holler. Love to get back in touch with you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.